Hello, everyone. This is the 170th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I welcome back English football fan Mr. Chris Bayes as we discuss Liverpool in the 2000-2001 season, which culminated not only the UEFA Cup win, but other cup wins as well. Mr. Bays has been on a podcast on a number of occasions discussing the Liverpool Football Club history. Hello, Chris. Welcome back.
Morning, Shahan. Thank you very much for inviting me again. Really looking forward to this episode.
Can you describe the state of the affairs at Liverpool as we come to the summer of 2000?
We were I think, very much seeking to re-establish ourselves because, like we talked about in the previous podcasts that you mentioned, we'd had a little bit of a barren period during the 1990s. So Liverpool's period of dominance had sort of come to quite an abrupt end in the early 90s. Kenny Dalglish, I think, had obviously been scarred by Hillsborough, and so he resigned quite dramatically and was replaced by Graham Souness, and that didn't really work out very well. Whilst other English clubs in the early period of the Premier League were embracing, the new opportunities provided through like commercialism and the whole new ball game, Liverpool looked to the past and sort of seek to reconnect with the boot room culture and appointed Roy Evans. Now, like we talked about on my previous appearance, I think Roy Evans was unfortunate. He did well, his side played well, but they only really won one trophy, the League Cup, which probably wasn't like a fair return on performance. I think he was a little bit unfortunate in the sense that only one or two teams made the Champions League back then. But by the point of where we're talking about now, Evans had been replaced. So following on from the World Cup success in 1998 and Arsenal's success on Arsene Wenger, I think Liverpool sought to replicate that like French flavour. And well, they brought in Gerard Houllier initially as a joint manager with Roy Evans, and he'd worked with Evans quite briefly, really. It didn't really work out, and when results didn't go so well, I think Evans felt increasingly marginalised and he tendered his resignation. Houllier then brought Phil Thompson back into the fold, and in their first season together, we'd looked a lot better. We were very close. Well, we should have really probably qualified for the Champions League in 99 2000. We didn't win in our final five games, which obviously resulted in us falling out of the Champions League places. But I think by the point that we're going to talk about now, Houllier had been in place for a couple of seasons. He'd obviously sought to redress some of the issues that he'd inherited. And I think there was optimism generally amongst the fan base. He was considered to be doing a good job at this point.
Can you describe the backbone of this Liverpool squad ahead of the 2000-2001 season?
I sort of touched upon it just in the previous answer, really, that I think under Evans, Liverpool had often been accused of having a soft underbelly or lacking a backbone, really, having something of a weak backbone in their side. And so Houllier sought to address this quickly. And, in his first proper summer transfer window, he replaced David James with Sander Westerveld in goal, which I think, whilst he later fell out with Westerveld, it was an improvement. Also, we added a couple of really solid centre backs, Stefan Honcho and Sami Hyypiä, both of whom made massive contributions to this season that we're going to go on to describe. In Houlier's first full season, Jamie Carragher and Dominic Matteo had made up the back four, but he obviously felt that we needed to improve upon them, and so we brought in Marcus Babbel and Christian Ziege, who were obviously proven German internationals. In midfield, we had a very sort of strong array of players. So Dietmar Hamann had been signed and had established himself as kind of the holding midfielder. which was something Liverpool had lacked for a long time during the 90s, really. And then alongside him, you had a variety of options. So you had Steven Gerrard breaking through, Danny Murphy was an option, Schmitzer, Berger, we had a variety of options in midfield. Gary McAllister came in during this particular season. And up front also, we had Michael Owen, who was obviously established himself as like one of the world's premier goal scorers. Robbie Fowler and Emil Heskey were also there. So Heskey had been a big signing. He'd been brought in for a record transfer fee for Liverpool the previous season, 11 million from Leicester. And I think the hope was that he'd kind of carry us to the Champions League. It didn't quite work out in his first spell, but by the season we're going to come on to describe, I think he repaid that transfer fee handsomely. And yeah, we looked solid going into the season. I think everyone was optimistic.
You already mentioned some of the transfers, but let's take a closer look
Yeah.
at the transfer activity in the summer of 2000 and what was the takeaway?
It's interesting. I think we'll come on to talk about this more as we discuss the podcast. Houlier's reign as Liverpool manager, you can sort of break it into sort of two halves, really. Like the first period that we're sort of describing now, he was very canny in the transfer market. So this particular transfer window, we brought in Babel from Bayern Munich on a free transfer, who was a real top class defender. He could play at right back, he could play at centre half. He'd been a German international for a number of years. I remember him starring in Euro 96. I think he was quite close to signing for Manchester United after that. Ziege was another signing that we made briefly into the season. And we'd courted him, and I think Liverpool got into kind of a little bit of controversy for like tapping him up at the time. But again, he was considered to be an uplift on what had gone before. And then the signing of Nick Barmby from Everton obviously got a lot of press attention because essentially we were signing a key player from one of our local rivals. I personally was a bit disappointed in that summer that we let David Thompson go, because I always remember liking him because he was a local lad who really played with a great degree of passion, but also he was a really skillful technical player. I didn't, and I still don't really think that Barmby was a great uplift on him, but he did chip in with some valuable goals during that campaign, Barmby. The signing that I think surprised most people that summer was that of Gary McAllister. So we brought Gary McAllister in on a free transfer from Coventry. I think was he about 38, 37,
Something
36,
like that,
something.
yeah.
He's certainly like at an age where you think he'd be coming to the end of his top level career. And so I can't remember, like, for example, my dad always said during the 90s, like McAllister felt like a Liverpool player. He was a player who we probably could and should have maybe looked at earlier. Maybe when he went to Leeds, he would have been an ideal signing for us. But I think people didn't really see the contribution he was going to make because of his age. And then we also signed Bernard Diarmid, who was a World Cup winner. He'd been in the France squad in 1998. And I vividly recall, the only thing I can really remember about Bernard Diarmid, he almost scored with an overhead kick on his debut. And, it was like one of
Right,
those
but he
sliding.
hardly featured after
Yeah,
that, I don't
it's
think.
like
Yeah.
one of those sliding doors moments where, like, if that had gone in, like, you think, oh, he might have, like, because he obviously had ability, but I think he perhaps wasn't cut out for the physicality of the English. He was only quite slight, I think, if I recall, and he never really featured hugely, but they were sort of the main signings. But I think there was movement in ins and outs, like Houllier, like Rafa, who obviously succeeded him. They were very active in the transfer market. So like they'd bring players in and move them on quite quickly. So Houllier particularly, I think, because the job he had was to kind of take the team forward. In his first season, he'd brought in like a couple of or three players that I can remember. So Rigobert Song, Titi Kamara, and Eric Meyer. Now, they were all quite solid players, but if you're then thinking about going on to win trophies and to compete for championships, they probably weren't at the level that was needed. So I think they all moved on in the summer and other squad members went out the door as well. I think Steve Staunton left around this time. So yeah, we were quite active in the transfer market, but like I say, the players I was most excited about us signing were Marcus Babbel and Christian Ziege.
Other players who came on board were backup French goalkeeper Peggy
Peggy.
Arfaxad, who would be involved in a controversy many years later that we can sidestep. We
Hmm,
also had a French defender, Grégory Vignal from Montpellier, who
yeah.
I believe also didn't really feature as much, very young at this point.
Looked very good when he played, Vignal. I remember like seeing I think he debuted against West Ham during this season and he looked really assured. And in one of probably the first of many proclamations, I said to me mate who I used to go to the game with at that time, I think he'll play about 200 games for Liverpool, which obviously he never did. So, but he did look very assured as a young player. And he also won a crucial free kick that we'll probably come on to describe later in the pod.
And you have the Icelandic Daniel Sjolund, who came from West Ham in November. Also, the Croatian Igor Bishkan
Mm,
came from Dinamo Zagreb in December. And of course, Jari Litmanen, the Finnish star from Barcelona, came in the new year. So as far as the departures, you have some of the old guard leaving, like Stig Ing Bjørneby, the Norwegian. He left to
yeah.
join Blackburn Rovers. The Irish defender Phil Babb joined Sporting in Portugal. You mentioned David Thompson. Dominic Matteo, he left and joined
Mm,
Leeds. He was a good signing for them. And
yeah.
others like the American goalkeeper Brad Friedel, who had, I think, work permit issues for some time. He
Mm,
joined Blackburn. He became a very good goalkeeper in the English league into the next
yeah.
decade. So it's one of those what if moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think a few of those players, like as you say, Matteo. I always remember Matteo. I think Matteo was sort of affected, and I think I talked about this when we were talking about the Evans era. A lot of expectation was placed on him when he broke into the Liverpool side because he started so well and he looked very assured and comfortable on the ball. And then comparisons with Alan Hansen were made, and obviously you have to be very good really to sort of live up to those comparisons. But I think he was a good player, and he obviously proved it when he went on to Leeds, and he's really highly regarded, isn't he, by their fans? And yeah, Friedel, yeah, it's a strange one, really, why it didn't work out for him at Liverpool, because they fought so hard to get him, but he then didn't quite manage to displace David James, and obviously Houllier then felt that he needed to improve in that position, and so we brought Westerveld in, and he didn't really featured again after that. I think he played maybe 2 or 3 games in 99, 2000, but he obviously, as you say, he then went on to be like a stellar goalkeeper for Blackburn and Spurs. And yeah, it's a puzzling one really why it didn't work out for him at Liverpool.
Others to leave included Rigobert Song, the Cameroon defender who left in November. Steve Staunton left Liverpool for a second time to join Aston Villa for a second time. You have the Dutch striker Eric Meyer also departing in December. Titi Kamara, another player that who he had signed, he left in December. Another Icelandic, Hokur Gudnason, again, who hardly featured, he left. Were there any expectations for Liverpool ahead of participating in this UEFA Cup?
Yeah, I think the fan base as a whole was disappointed not to be in the Champions League at this point because we'd been in the position the previous season where it looked inevitable that we'd qualify, and then we fell away quite dramatically, really. And so we had to settle for the UEFA Cup, as it were. But like we've talked about before, Liverpool have a special relationship with European competition, and so everyone would have been excited about the prospect of a long participation in this competition. I think when I was looking back at the UEFA Cup, it was always filled with good teams. Like, and also, as I recall, looking back, it was in that era, wasn't it? I think it was the start of that era where the Champions League, like the teams that didn't qualify from the first, there was
Oh
two group
yes,
stages,
yes.
wasn't there, in the
Right, right,
Champions
right.
League?
Yeah.
And if you didn't qualify from the first group stage,
They would get
some of
direct
the
entry into the UEFA Cup. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Which was
So
somewhat controversial for some team
yeah,
people, but
well, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think Liverpool were beneficiaries of that a couple of seasons later, but it was a little bit strange. But it did have some good sides in the competition, and Liverpool went on to face quite a number of them actually. So, but I think people would have been excited about the opportunity to be in that competition and excited about the season as a whole, really.
the UEFA Cup started in September. In the first round, Liverpool faced Romanian side Rapid Bucharest. The first leg at Bucharest on September 14th, Liverpool wins 1-0 through a Nick Barmby goal. The second leg at Anfield 2 weeks later on September 28th ends in a scoreless tie. Liverpool advanced. I think they just went through the motions, probably didn't exert themselves that much, and they were
I,
just getting in the rhythm of the season at this point anyway. So,
yeah, like when I sort of look back at the games ahead of recording, you look at like the lineup that we played in both games, it has a little bit of a like a hodgepodge makeshift nature. So for the first game, I didn't realize that we had a back four of Song, Babel, Honsho, and Ziga, which is a combination I don't ever remember playing before or again. So the also Diomed, who we mentioned, he
right.
didn't feature much. He did play in both of these ties, which again I don't remember despite actually going to the home game. There's little bits that sort of show we weren't quite at the point where we had a settled side at this point. So, Jamie Carragher was operating as a holding midfielder, I think, still a little bit at this time. And some of those names we've mentioned appear in the team sheet along with like players like Vegard Hegem, who again was another player who was eased out, I think, really. And that was largely due to injury. He was a good player, but when you look back, you sort of see things that like you just forget with the passing of time. But yeah, I think they were fairly uneventful game. I mean, Nick Barmby scored, didn't he? I think in the first leg, and did chip in with a number of crucial goals during this UEFA Cup run. But I don't have many abiding memories of the second leg, which was quite a dour 0-0 draw at Anfield.
For the second round, Liverpool faced Czech Republic side Slovan Liberec. So the first leg on October 26th is at Anfield, and Liverpool wins with a late goal through Emil Heskey in the
Yeah.
88th minute. But we have to remember that Robbie Fowler struck a penalty kick that went over the bar.
Yeah, I was on the cop that night, as in the first game against Bucharest. Yeah, I think like I would have gone to that game because no offense to anyone listening who supports Slovan Liberec, but they weren't like a kind of household name. So you kind of go thinking, oh, we'll score a few tonight. And I think Fowler was kind of making his comeback from injury at this time. And so, yeah, you don't expect him to blaze a penalty over the bar like he was normally quite reliable from the spot. But yeah, I remember it was quite a grim night in terms of the weather. It was raining quite heavily, and the Czech side defended pretty resolutely, and Liverpool couldn't break them down. And it looked as though it was going to be another dour draw. And then Heskey sort of popped up with the winner like a couple of minutes from the end, like a nice volley. And that meant we had like a cushion going into the second leg. But then in that second game, Liberec scored early, didn't they? They went
Right,
ahead.
right.
And then Liverpool were quite comfortable. They got to 3-1. But there was an uneasy trait that this side had around this time where they seemed very incapable of sort of seeing out games, and they would always kind of make life more difficult for them than they seem to need to. And so that they conceded a late goal and they were clinging on a little bit in that particular game. But yeah, they went through relatively comfortably in the end, I think. But Liberec, I think, probably were better than people had expected them to be and gave Liverpool a little bit of a fright on the night.
For the third round in November and December, Liverpool face strong Greek side Olympiacos. The first leg is in Athens. Liverpool go ahead first with Nick Barmby scoring in the 38th minute. But Alexios Alexandros ties the match in the second half in the 65th minute. But almost immediately, Gerrard heads in the second goal in the 67th minute.
Yeah,
And it looked like Liverpool were gonna pull away win.
yeah,
But in the very last minute, Alexandros scored his second goal and the match ended as a 2-2 tie. Again, it's an away match, so Liverpool had the edge with the away goals and everything.
yeah.
But there was a feeling that they probably should have come away with a win out, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I watched that match back actually in its entirety because it was on YouTube, and I can remember like a lot of noise being made at the time because Olympiacos were one of those sides who had fallen out of the Champions League, and I think they felt slightly aggrieved to have done so. They had a long unbeaten run in Europe, apparently, more a long unbeaten home run. But Liverpool looked comfortable in that game. You know, they went ahead and then, as you say, went back ahead and looked like they were going to sort of see out a famous victory. But like I said in the previous sort of summary of the previous game, they just had this inability seemingly at that time to see out games. You know, there was quite a worrying pattern from the early part of the season. I can remember we were playing Southampton away where we were winning either 3-0 or 3-1 and looked very comfortable, then conceded two late goals. There's obviously this game. There were league games we threw away against Newcastle, Tottenham. There's a notable one that I'm going to describe in response to the next question as well. So just they were a bit defensively suspect in key moments of games at this point. But I suppose being sort of philosophical about it, like 2-2 away isn't a bad result because you've scored two away goals and then you're going into a home game where you'd expect to kind of get the better of Olympiacos.
And the second leg on December 7th at Anfield, Liverpool won 2-0 comfortably with Heskey scoring in the first half in the 28th minute and Nick Barmby scoring the second in the 60th minute. Liverpool advanced to the spring knockout rounds. As we reach the midpoint of the season, despite performing in a satisfactory manner, Liverpool are off the pace in the league as Manchester United is running away with that league title. But Liverpool are still alive in all the remaining cup competitions. Was this why you think they eventually excelled?
It's interesting you mentioned Manchester United there, and you know the context you mentioned them in. It's not unfamiliar, is it, that during this period, Man United were the predominant side. They often seemed to kind of have during this period the league pretty much kind of shown up by Christmas time. But we beat Man United at Old Trafford, which was the first win there in a decade, I think. And obviously that was quite a long and painful decade, like we've talked about. But my abiding memories of Liverpool going to Old Trafford, certainly in the late 90s and immediately prior to this period, we always played reasonably well and came away with nothing. You know, there were a number of like late defeats, most notably in the FA Cup. So to go there and win and to keep a clean sheet and to nullify them, I suppose, was a big thing, really. And then we followed that up with a thrashing of Arsenal in the next league game. So you probably saw a growth in confidence, really, around this period. And also, it was around this time that Houllier seemed to sort of settle on the back four. So Jamie Carragher moved to left back, which obviously was a position he was unfamiliar with. And he was never going to be a left back in the vein of sort of John Arne Riise getting forward or Andy Robertson in the modern context. But he was solid and he was dependable. And that was kind of the basis that the second half of the season was built upon. We kind of became a lot more defensively robust and difficult to beat and difficult to break through. And I do think that those two games were a big turning point for us. I mean, we still had the odd sticky result in the second half of the season, but if you compare the first half to the second, we really began to sort of find our form, and the stop-start nature of the campaign that beset the first half of the season wasn't there in the second half. Yeah, I was going to say, like, a game that sticks out that sums up Liverpool in the first half of this season was against Leeds in the league, where we somehow contrived to lose 4-3
Oh
despite
yeah,
having,
Viduka's 4 goals, right? That match,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, like we led 2-0, I think. Then I think Leeds got back. I can't remember the sequence of scoring, but we led all the way through and we had opportunities to put the game to bed and somehow contrived to lose 4-3. I don't think anybody who I was with spoke for the whole journey. Like after, I think we were just in shock really that we'd managed to lose this game. But as I say, by the second half of the season, we had that solid back four in place and we were a lot more difficult to beat.
For the fourth round in the New Year 2001, on February 15th, Liverpool faced Italian side AS Roma, managed by Fabio Capello. That's a Roma of Totti, the Brazilian Cafu, Gabriel Batistuta, the Argentinian superstar,
Yeah.
as well as the Japanese star Hidetoshi Nakata. The first leg at Rome, at Stadio Olimpico, the venue of Liverpool's 1984 Champions Cup win against the same opponent. So this was the first meeting between the sides in 17 years. Liverpool wins this match 2-0 at Roma with Michael Owen scoring both goals. Liverpool has the edge going into the second leg the following week on February 22nd at Anfield. However, in this match, Michael Owen misses a penalty kick that's saved by Francesco Antonioli. Roma wins this match 1-0 with a long range shot from the Uruguayan Gianni Gigu. But Roma has a player sent off late in the game, and Liverpool held the score to advance.
But it was an interesting tie, really. One that definitely everyone was very, very excited about. Maybe there was also a little bit of trepidation ahead of playing Roma because they did have an awesome squad at that time, like you say. Fantastic away performance in the first game. Very much a kind of smash and grab, 2 goals from Owen. Haman and McAllister very solid in the midfield. The second leg was very much a different story. It turned out in the end that we were very much clinging on. And I remember the referee looked like he'd given a penalty to Roma. Or I think he did give a motion to give a penalty, and then he changed his mind and gave a corner. But Owen also missed a penalty in that game, so we could have kind of had the game wrapped up. But Roma did come on very strong towards the end. I think I've probably never been as thankful to hear a final whistle. We were quite lucky to go through, really. But there was a great atmosphere, I remember, at Anfield that night. Everyone got behind the team and sort of saw us over the line. And given the pedigree of Roma and of Serie A more generally at that time, it was a massive result, really, for this team and for Liverpool under Houllier.
Roma would go on to win the league title that season in
Yeah, yeah,
Italy. This win against Roma was followed by winning the League Cup against Birmingham
yeah.
City. Did winning this trophy inspire the confidence for Liverpool to make a claim for the following cup competitions?
Yeah, I mean, the Birmingham game was quite funny because it sort of showed that I sort of just said, didn't I? Oh, we were a lot more solid, but we kind of showed some of that trait that had kind of plagued the first part of the season because obviously it was like first final we'd been in for a few seasons and we were half favourites because Birmingham were a championship side, I think, at the time.
Right.
So everyone would have been expecting Liverpool to win. We went ahead, Fowler scored a lovely goal From memory, I think we were like Birmingham got a penalty in the last throws of the game, basically, and then that took it into extra time. And obviously, then it went to penalties. Like, so you then into that like sort of lottery situation, and obviously we prevailed and won the trophy, but we'd made quite hard work of winning it. But I do believe it definitely gave confidence that we could go on and do even greater things because we were going well in the UEFA Cup, like we've been talking about, and the FA Cup run was starting to gather momentum, and the league form, as a result, I think, of this improved dramatically in the second half of the season. So it seemed as the season kind of wore on, we were playing massive games every 3 or 4 days, and everyone was optimistic and excited as the season progressed.
For the quarterfinals, Liverpool face Portuguese side Porto. The first leg is on March 8th at Porto, and Liverpool come away with a scoreless tie.
Yeah,
The second leg on the following week on March 15th is at Anfield, and Liverpool wins this match with two first half goals through Danny Murphy, who took an important role that season, and Michael Owen. Liverpool advanced to the semi-finals.
yeah,
In the semi-finals, they face a much sterner test, Barcelona. This is a Barcelona that has stars like Rivaldo the Brazilian,
yeah,
the Dutchman Patrick Kluivert, Mark Overmars, Frank de Boer, Philip Cocu, Pep Guardiola, Carlos Puyol, current Paris Saint-Germain manager Luis Enrique. The first leg is at a new camp at Barcelona on April 5th. And just like the match in Porto, Liverpool come away with a scoreless tie.
yeah,
2 weeks later, at Anfield on April 19th, is the second leg. Liverpool wins this match through a penalty kick. This time, after the previous misses, it's Gary McAllister that's tasked with the penalty kick duties. It's a strange goal because it's like from a corner kick. I think Patrick Kluivert
handles the
handles
ball.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, just before halftime in the 44th minute, Gary McAllister scores from a penalty kick.
yeah.
And by the narrowest of margins, Liverpool advanced to the final of the UEFA Cup.
Yeah, I think where you sort of you're right there in terms of how we got a lot of negative press from certainly the Catalan press and media for our approach at the first leg against Barcelona. But I think Houllier was very pragmatic as a manager, so the way he approached this competition, if you get like a draw in the away game, I think he always fancied Liverpool to kind of do well in the return game at Anfield, and obviously that proved to be the case both against Porto and Barca. It might not be considered a vintage Barcelona side, but like the names that you reeled off there, like they still had an abundance of quality, didn't they? I remember it's like the first time probably as a Liverpool fan, like seeing in the flash kind of like genuine like World Cup winning talent playing for the opposition, like Rivaldo. Obviously, I remember there was one instance in the game, I think, where he picked up the ball and he skinned like three players, and he was only like, again, I haven't watched it. This is from memory what I'm saying here, but like he shot from, it must have been about 40 yards out, and he almost scored. And that was, he's just like, wow, like that's the level of player we're playing against now. We got over the line against Barcelona. I think, again, it was that defensive solidity. As you say, there was the penalty, and there was a bit of kind of sort of kidology from, I think it was Puyol or certain other Barcelona players were trying to put McAllister off. Obviously, McAllister had famously missed a penalty for Scotland in Euro 96, but he buried this one. I think he certainly let like Puyol know that he was happy that he'd buried it after he scored. And yeah, I mean, the atmosphere again, I can remember that was like following on from the Roma game, like the atmospheres both against Porto, but particularly against Barcelona. what was great about this as a Liverpool fan of the age that I am, you'd grown up kind of hearing all these stories about like great European nights at Anfield, but now we were having European nights of our own, and that one certainly like lives long in the memory. The atmosphere of full time. It was amazing. Such a let off and relief that we'd got through to a European final.
So Liverpool reached the UEFA Cup final as well as the FA Cup final in
Yeah.
April and started an unbeaten seven-match end of the season run to clinch a Champions League place. Did Liverpool hit top form at the right moment?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was like going back to your previous question, the fact that we were in these cup competitions buoyed us really and sort of really helped us kind of find that form, which was crucial during the running. And I think also, you can't sort of look over this without mentioning the contribution of Gary McAllister at this point in the season, so he'd really been probably a little bit of a bit part player during the first part of the season. But as the games began to come thick and fast, he really came to the fore. So he scored a number of, we've already talked, Barcelona, he scored that penalty. He scored a free kick in the last minute of probably the most epic Merseyside derby I can remember seeing. Had everything. The last minute winner in that game. It really was fantastic. He also then scored, I think, against Bradford and Coventry, and sort of games that Liverpool in previous iterations of Liverpool had stumbled in. So like the Roy Evans team was notorious for struggling against sides like Bradford and Coventry, and Houllier obviously had his own struggles with Bradford the previous season when they denied us Champions League qualification. So McAllister's contribution at this point, I think, can't be overstated. And, it was like there was a chant where like it seemed that like it was like, oh, we love you, Paul, yeah, we love you, Bradford. And then it was like every week another goal was added to this chant. So that sort of sums up how much of a key man he became at that point. But yeah, like as I say, it was an epic kind of end to the season because the games were coming thick and fast. And yeah, we found form definitely at the right time.
Ahead of the UEFA Cup final, Liverpool won the FA Cup final over the
Yeah,
weekend against Arsenal with Michael Owen scoring a double. In retrospect, was that a driving force or did it tire the team for the UEFA Cup final?
it's a good question. I think when you listen back to like the videos the players have made around the campaign, I think they were obviously desperate to celebrate kind of having won the FA Cup, but Houllier, I think, insisted that the focus remained because we had the UEFA Cup final on the Wednesday. The FA Cup final itself, quite a remarkable result, really, because Arsenal were the better team on the day. 9 times out of 10, they probably would have gone on to lift the cup that day. But Michael Owen had other ideas, so he popped up with an equaliser and then a through ball from Patrick Berger, and he outpaced Lee Dixon and finished from a cute angle. And he basically won the cup for Liverpool. I think it was Clive Tildesley said he's won the cup for Liverpool all by himself now. Michael Owen, his reputation and standing with Liverpool fans probably isn't what it deserves to be because of what he subsequently kind of chose to do in the latter stages of it or in the other part of his career. But for me, he deserves legendary status at the club because of his contribution that day and over the course of this season. I think the fact we kept winning these games bred the momentum, and we were then through obviously to this UEFA Cup final, and I think we were confident in going into that because we'd kind of won two trophies now and kind of let's go and get a third. It was just momentum was building almost game by game.
The final is on May 16th at Dortmund in Germany
Dortmund, yeah,
at Westfalenstadion against surprising Spanish side of Alaves that no one expected to reach the final.
yeah,
And it would be a classic final
yeah,
that no one would have expected beforehand, I
They had a
imagine.
great kit, Alaves. I remember it was a really like fetching, iconic shirt that they had. And as you know, I'm a bit of a kit enthusiast. What I liked about it, I think it had all of their season ticket holders' names embroidered into it, because they weren't a massive name and still aren't, are they? So but they made a massive contribution in this game for sure.
Liverpool takes the lead in the fourth minute when McAllister's free kick from the right hand side was headed in by Babel. They scored the second through Steven Gerrard. And at this point, it looks like Liverpool may be coasting. But Liverpool would have a problem from crosses from the right hand side. And in the
Contra.
and in the 27th minute, Contra, the Romanian defender, crossed from the right side, and that was headed in by Ivan Alonso. But Liverpool takes the lead again. In the 41st minute, Michael Owen is fouled in the box, and Gary McAllister scores from a penalty kick. Again, as the first half ends, it looks like Liverpool are likely winners. But immediately at the restart in the 48th minute, again, Contra crossed from the right side, and this time it was headed in by Javi Moreno. And just a few minutes later, Javi Moreno himself scores from a free kick to tie the match in the 51st minute. Liverpool, who are seemingly winning this match, are now in a situation where the momentum is with the Spanish side.
Mm,
However, Liverpool comes back, and in the 73rd minute, Gary McAllister sends Fowler through on the right side. He cuts to the middle and shoots and scores Liverpool's fourth goal. Liverpool are seemingly headed for a win,
yeah,
but a minute left. There's a corner kick from the right side, and it's headed in by Jordi Cruyff, son of you know who and
yeah.
former Manchester United player. So in regulation time, the match is 4-4. We go to extra time. In extra time, Liverpool's helped when Magno is sent off in the 99th minute.
Another sent off, didn't they? I
Yes,
think. Yeah.
yes, around the same time as the winning goals. Magno
Mm,
is sent off in the 99th minute and Antonio Carmona in the 116th minute. In this 116th minute, Gary McAllister takes a free kick, this time from the left side, and it's headed into his own net by the Spanish defender Heli. And Liverpool wins this very entertaining match 5-4, and they win the cup treble. Very exciting match for anyone who witnessed it.
yeah, probably very exciting for like a neutral. I think it gave us, I think, multiple heart attacks on the evening. But yeah, like you said, it was a strange game really because like at certain points we looked so comfortable in the tie. Maybe there was fatigue. They just struggled. They struggled to see the game out, and fatigue would be understandable because they played an epic amount of games, obviously, during the course of the season. The contribution on the night, McAllister, I think, was man of the match. I think showed his class and professionalism, really, because he'd obviously been left out of the starting 11 against Arsenal. He'd come on to make a telling contribution in that game, but he was the star man in this game, had a hand in everything, really. Fowler, you couldn't help but feel sorry for Robbie Fowler, I think, on this night a little bit. Obviously, we won the cup, like, so you don't feel such, but he almost had his moment of being the hero of like coming on to score the goal that won the trophy. But then I remember Barry Davis in the commentary when I listened back to it, like he gets very excited that Robbie Fowler scored. But I think Alvarez, like you say, wasn't a name that was probably familiar with a lot of football fans, but they did themselves proud on that evening. But I also I remember before at the time, and then when I looked back at like the programs that I've got from the matches, I think Alaves played, was it Kaiserslautern in the semi final? And when I was looking at the second leg program against Barcelona, I think Alaves had won 5-1 or something in the semi-final first leg. So they were pretty much in the fight. We knew we were going to be playing them. So they obviously were no mugs, and some of the players that they had, Contra, we've mentioned, and Moreno, I think they both moved to AC Milan, didn't they, after this
I believe
season?
so,
So
yeah.
Contra, I remember in that final, he was outstanding, rivaling McAllister for man of the match. Probably someone Jamie Carragher doesn't want to remember too much, given he turned him inside out a few times. But yeah, it was an epic game. Yeah, most certainly.
Liverpool had won their first European trophy since winning in Rome in 1984. Can you describe the atmosphere in the city?
When I was thinking back about this, it was fantastic, but also quite muted at the same time because whilst we'd won this amazing, remarkable cup treble, we still had one more game to play against Charlton away. Because we hadn't beaten Chelsea, I think, at Anfield, we'd drawn 2-2 with them in the midst of this unbeaten run we were describing. That meant that our Champions League
Oh, that's right. They
qualification
had to
was,
win that last match against Charlton to
yeah.
clinch the
So,
Champions League spot,
so
right?
we weren't assured of Champions League qualification. So whilst the celebrations were fantastic and everyone was ecstatic, it still wasn't a case of job done. And then I can remember it was like the last Saturday of the season. Didn't go to the game at Charlton, but I watched it in the Coubertin Sports Bar in Liverpool. That's no longer there. Like with one of my mates, Gary, who I used to go to the game with a lot, and we were 18, I think, at the time. So like, let's say we like quite well oiled before the game started. For the first half, Charlton battered Liverpool. It was like it just felt like we're gonna get beat here. Like, but then in the second half, Fowler scored an overhead kick, I remember, and we ended up winning quite comfortably. And then I think that was when the celebrations really began in earnest. So there was a parade through Liverpool city centre and around the area. Yeah, that was remarkable. I can remember kind of the bus coming down the Strand and being sort of stood on top of a bridge that's no longer there because I think that part of the city's been redeveloped quite a lot. But there were thousands and thousands of people, a sea of red, and everyone was obviously ecstatic. And also, I think I was exhausted as well because it had been like this remarkable run of games, like I say, where you seem to have a cup final like every 3 or 4 days, seemingly, for the last part of that season. But yeah, what an amazing time to be a Liverpool fan that was.
Michael Owen's form was instrumental in him winning the Ballon d'Or at the end of that year. Was this season and perhaps the following season the best we saw of Owen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think he was kind of lethal, wasn't he, during this season and around this time. Obviously, he'd been a great player since he broke into the Liverpool side and he'd done really well establishing himself under Evo. But then he'd obviously then gone on to the World Cup that summer and had lit up the place there. I think the following season was when he first had the hamstring injuries, and that meant he had to rebuild his game a little bit, and his hold-up play and kind of his all-round game, I think, improved as a consequence of that. Whilst he was still phenomenally quick, he wasn't quite maybe the blinding pace of the first 2 seasons. His goal scoring record this season was fantastic. His partnership with Heskey was obviously really great for Liverpool, but then England obviously utilised it as well. And yeah, he won the Ballon d'Or, didn't he? Probably deservedly so, I'd say. And in many ways, like with Michael Owen, like as I say, I think in some ways it's like a shame that he's not held in the regard that his career at Liverpool possibly
Yeah,
deserves.
I'm
Like,
surprised about that as well. I've noticed that online as well.
football fans are fickle, aren't they? Like, a lot of the time, like, and it's interesting because, like, Steve McManaman also gets a lot of stick from some Liverpool fans because he left to go to Madrid. I think with Owen, the fact that he then later played for United clouds some people's opinions. But for me, like, you can't dispute what he did for our club, like, particularly during this season. And therefore, he's deserving of legendary status. It is just a shame that He later played for Manchester United, but that's life, isn't it? Yeah, he was a great player. So yeah, deserving Ballon d'Or winner this season.
In a way, Michael Owen's excellence up front somewhat sidelined Robbie Fowler, a favorite son of the
Yeah,
city. Now, how was that felt on the terraces?
I think well, there's something in that. I also think it's slightly overplayed because, like, I'm just gonna get the stats up for this season because I pulled them out. So Fowler, I think he scored 17 in all comps. Let me just check. Sorry, I'm just gonna consult my notes that I made.
But he was also injured as well, right? At some
Yeah,
point in the
he was sort
season.
of in and out of the team,
Right.
wasn't he? So like, you're 17 in all competitions, and he scored in two out of three finals. So his contribution was important, but yes, you are right. I think his place in the starting 11 wasn't assured, and he was a little bit marginalised. He was probably more of a squad player than he would have liked, but 17 goals in all competitions is still a good return. And obviously, he then left Liverpool to go and play for Leeds the following season. And he was in great form ahead of the 2002 World Cup. I think he scored 12 league goals for Leeds after joining them in December. So it still shows that he was a quality operator at that point. But I think with Fowler, he was obviously adored by the fans, probably more so than Michael Owen ever was or ever will be. That's undisputed. I think he didn't necessarily help himself with Houllier. There always seemed to be a little bit of kind of hostility from both sides. I think Fowler was one of the last remaining what I'd call like Evans loyalists. Like, so, he was kind of eased out, I think, ultimately. And obviously, he had issues, I think, with Phil Thompson as well, predated Houllier and kind of went back to Tomo's time in charge of the reserve side. But yeah, he still was adored by the fan base at this point, and when he got opportunities, he still scored. So I think his contribution to that season, whilst it wasn't perhaps as great as Owen's, it was still significant.
It was the year of the five cups,
Yeah,
as Liverpool would go on to win the Charity Shield, as I think it was still called back then,
still call it that now, Sean.
and the UEFA Super Cup.
Yeah,
Was this the zenith of Liverpool under Huya?
yeah, definitely. The expectations would have been incredibly high ahead of the following season because of this remarkable campaign we've been describing. Ferguson, I think, had also announced that he was going to pack up as United manager at the end of that season, which obviously then didn't transpire. But we beat them in the Charity Shield at Cardiff 2-1, I think that was. Very much had a little bit of an Indian sign over United at this point, so like hoodoo, like we were winning regularly against them, despite the fact that their fans kind of like mocked the what they called the Mickey Mouse treble with a banner. But like then going into that season, obviously Houllier was taken ill during the game against Leeds, and that puts everything into perspective, I suppose. Obviously, he nearly died, didn't he? And he was then obviously away from the club for a number of months, and Phil Thompson took over and did a remarkable job that season. Again, I think that's overlooked just how astute tactically Thompson was and how a lot of clubs probably would have kind of fallen off the rails, but he managed to kind of keep us on track in Europe and in the league that season. Now, obviously, we didn't end up going on to win either of those competitions, but we were still very much in the hunt when Houllier did return to the dugout. When he did, we beat Roma again in a famous game. And I think Houllier then sort of said, I think there was a quote that he came out with that he said, we're 10 games away from greatness ahead of a tie with Bayer Leverkusen. And we lost that. And then they went on to beat Man United in the semi-final. Now, I still think if we'd have held on to get past Leverkusen, we were like 7 minutes away. I think we probably would have got on to play in the European Cup final that season because we were a better side than Manchester United that year. But that was probably something of a turning point. We kind of, whilst he said we were 10 games away from we were suddenly quite far away from greatness the following season, because 2002, 2003 was one of the most bizarre seasons I can remember as a Liverpool fan, because we'd started off well, like we were top of the league in November, but we weren't playing well. And then we went on such a bad run. I don't think we won again until like mid-January. And suddenly, after leading the league, we didn't qualify for the Champions League. So I think for me, kind of the back end of that following season's the one we've talked about today. The transfer window between that season and 2002, 2003, that marks kind of the beginning of what I'd probably describe phase two of Houlier's reign, where we'd had Nicolas Anelka on loan and we chose not to sign him and instead brought in El Hadj Diouf, who looked great during the 2002 World Cup. Now, I remember him skinning Frank Lambert for looking really good. But Liverpool had fallen foul of buying players on the back of tournaments before. I'm thinking like Phil Babb, and again, Diouf didn't really live up to billing. Salif Diao was another player we brought in. He described him, Houllier, as like a new Patrick Vieira. He certainly wasn't of that capability. And Bruno Giroud, who again he compared to Zinedine Zidane, who he most definitely wasn't anything like Zinedine Zidane. I think Giroud, in fairness to him, he probably was a decent player, and he probably would have been all right for Liverpool as one of those signings like Titi Camara, Rigobert Song, like someone who came in, did the job, and then got moved on. But when he was brought in, it was sort of brought in as like a stellar signing that was going to take us on from where we were at to kind of the next level. And none of those signings worked out really. And I think this sort of season 2000, 2003, even though we won the League Cup, beating United in the final, it definitely was an abject failure that season. And Houllier, after that, he was always seemingly fighting against criticism, because he'd spoken a lot in the early part of his reign about 5-year plans and, the 5-year plan to get Liverpool to where they needed to be. And suddenly we were going backwards rather than forwards. So that was sort of the turning point, really, for me. I think that kind of close season.
In closing, as Liverpool eras go, how is this year of 5 cups regarded by Liverpool historians in terms of culturally and sociologically for the city?
I think, like I said to you before we started recording, for me, this is kind of probably my favourite season. And I think that speaks to the age that I was at that time, the amount of games that I went to that season, the availability that I had to get tickets, probably just the age that I was kind of. It was an amazing time to be a Red. Probably had a detrimental impact on my A-level studies, but that's another story. In terms of Gerard Houllier and how to sort of encapsulate, like obviously he passed away sadly a few years ago. And I think I wrote on my social media at the time in tribute to him, because I was genuinely really saddened when he died, in a way that like felt like something, because he obviously had such a great affinity with Liverpool, the place, the people, and the team. I think I wrote at the time that Gerard Houllier, I'll remember him as the man who brought a winning mentality back to Liverpool Football Club. And I don't think there's any better kind of summary you can give really to the man than that.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. And we'll return with the 2004-2005 Champions League Cup winning season in a future podcast. So, Chris, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on Liverpool history.
Thanks, Shahan. Been a great pleasure to record this, and you've certainly made me remember a very positive period as a Liverpool fan and in my life. So thanks again.
Thank you.